born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana on November 14, 1939. My parents were Rosalind and Leslie McKenzie. I've lived in Baton Rouge all my life, except for a short time in 1944 to 1946 when my father was in service. My grandparents were from Haynesville and Homer. My father was from Homer, and his parents were William and Martha McKenzie. Mother was from Haynesville, 14 miles north of Homer, and her parents were Nancy and Shelby Bean. Hence, you see why I'm named William Shelby. I went to the first grade in Haynesville, and then thereafter we moved back to Baton Rouge, and I attended Highlands Elementary School and South Downs Elementary School, and then went to the University Lab School for the 7th through the 12th grades. In the 11th grade, I began dating my future wife, Molly McVeigh. Although most of my classmates were going to LSU, and I would have been perfectly happy to go to LSU. My parents aspired to me looking at other schools, so I applied to Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and Duke. And much to my amazement, I was accepted to all 5. I had never been on the campus of any of them, and eventually I chose Princeton mainly because it was the furthest south of the Ivy League schools. During my senior year, my future wife, Molly McVeigh, graduated from LSU in December of 1960. And we were married on January 27, 1961. And our honeymoon was driving back from Baton Rouge to Princeton for my last semester. We had an apartment on a farm that was in a rural area near Princeton. The name of the farm was Washington Well Farm because allegedly George had refreshed himself there on the way to the Battle of Princeton. We spent that one semester together in New Jersey, and then drove back to Baton Rouge, and I entered the law school in September of 1961. Decided to enter Princeton in the chemical engineering field, and I graduated with a degree in chemical engineering. And I thoroughly enjoyed the early part of chemical engineering, but by the time I neared my end of the program and I was going to have to make a decision about going to graduate school, I had reached the decision that I might enjoy something else more than chemical engineering. I was very fortunate to have a practicing attorney from Trenton, New Jersey, who taught a business law course for engineers. And I took that course in the first semester of my senior year, and I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed that course and the study of law, and that led me to decide that I would apply to the LSU Law School for admission. In the fall of 1961, I became an LSU student. I was very fortunate to have these really great professors at law school. Everybody remembers J. Denson Smith, Big Red, who was a terror in the classroom, but made sure his students knew their subjects well. I had George Pugh to teach federal jurisdiction and procedure and evidence. I had Dale Bennett to teach criminal law, and I had a host of other excellent faculty members, and I have the utmost respect for the LSU faculty that taught me. I graduated first in my class in the LSU Law School, and was a member of the Order of the Coif and editor-in-chief of the Law Reviews. After I got out of law school in 1970, I received a call from Dean Paul Hebert asking if I would join the adjunct faculty. My first assignment was the awe-inspiring assignment of substituting for George Pugh, teaching his course in federal jurisdiction and procedure while he was on sabbatical. I survived that experience, and the next year J. Denson Smith, who taught insurance law, retired. And so I agreed to teach insurance law. And that assignment lasted for 43 years. I was interviewed by several law firms. I was very familiar with Taylor Porter because my wife was a relative of Mr. Porter. I was tempted by other law firms, but I believe I made the right decision to go with Taylor Porter. I started with Taylor Porter at the handsome salary of $450 a month. I was very pleased when John Campbell, who had graduated from law school before I did but had been in the service, joined the firm a few months later. And I received a raise to $500 a month to receive the same compensation as John. John and I have practiced law together throughout our entire careers, and he was always one of my best friends. John and I at one point were co-managing partners of the law firm. Taylor Porter representation of LSU grew out of the Louisiana scandals in the 1930s, when the Louisiana governor, the president of LSU, and others were indicted for fraudulent transactions. Law School Dean Paul Hebert was named acting president, and he and his chief assistant, General Troy Middleton, contacted Taylor Porter and asked Taylor Porter to undertake the representation of LSU to unravel all the fraudulent transactions. Taylor Porter continued to be LSU's primary outside counsel even to this day. But as the work on the 1930s scandal ended, Taylor Porter continued to represent LSU. I was fortunate to become involved in the representation of LSU in the 1970s and spent about 20 years as lead counsel for LSU until LSU created the inside position of general counsel. Unquestionably, the major lawsuit in my LSU career was the higher education desegregation suit that was filed in 1975 and finally dismissed in 2007, 32 years. Some would say that's a lawyer's dream to have a case that lasts 32 years. It was a fascinating case. The issue was whether or not LSU or the state of Louisiana had done everything that was necessary to do under the law to dismantle the prior dual system of higher education. The allegations were not based upon any overt acts of current discrimination, but only whether the state had taken sufficient steps to dismantle the prior dual system. The case involved extensive discovery, extensive motion practice, including summary judgments at one point in favor of each side that were reversed on appeal. There were several failed settlements where goals were set and not been able to be met. And finally, in 1995, we entered into a settlement agreement where the parties agreed that the Louisiana colleges would differentiate themselves by admission standards, and that certain amounts of capital construction would be completed on the campuses of the prior predominantly black institutions. That work was fully done. And in 2007, the case was finally dismissed. My favorite experience was with basketball coach Dale Brown. Dale in the 1980s got into a monumental dispute with the NCAA over alleged infractions at LSU. Dale was quoted in Sports Illustrated as referring to the NCAA as a bunch of Gestapo bastards. The NCAA shortly thereafter filed infractions charges against Dale Brown. And those infractions were to be heard before a committee in Colorado Springs. In preparation for that meeting, I met with Dale Brown at his office on campus. As I went into his office, I saw a bulletin posted on the wall for his basketball players that says, "Do not say anything derogatory about other teams because it might fire them up." When I saw that, I just wished Dale had followed his own advice. So we flew on a private plane to Colorado Springs. All the way there, Dale could not say enough bad things about the NCAA. We got in the hearing, and the initial issue was whether the charges against Dale Brown were timely. It was a close call, and we were using an argument on which the NCAA had never previously ruled. We argued that the charges were not timely. The infractions committee recessed, went out, came back an hour or so later, and announced that they agreed with LSU and dismissed all the charges against Dale Brown. The insurance treatise came about from a conversation that I had out of the blue with a telephone call from Mike McKay, who was then chairman of the insurance section of the Louisiana State Bar Association. Mike said that his section perceived the need for an insurance treatise and offered me a stipend if I would undertake that project. Well, I agreed only on the condition that I could recruit a bright young LSU professor, Alston Johnson, to be my co-author. Alston agreed. So then Alston and I divided up the insurance topics, and we wrote the treatise, and Alston already had connections with the West Publishing Company, so we prevailed upon them to publish our treatise as volume 15 of the Louisiana Civil Law Treatise series, and our first edition was published in 1986. The Gaylord case involved the release of a highly toxic chemical, a big red cloud, over the town of Bogalusa from the Gaylord Chemical Company. As soon as that red cloud dispersed, another cloud of as soon as that red cloud dispersed, a multitude of attorneys descended upon Bogalusa, including no less than Johnny Cochran, fresh from his victories in the O.J. Simpson case. In any event, 16,500 claims were presented in a class action in Washington Parish, Louisiana. We were representing excess insurers who, under the Louisiana Direct Action Statute, could be sued. And those insurers recognized that they each needed separate coverage counsel, but that it was be economical for them to hire separate counsel whose job it was to defend them on the merits of the case. So they retained me and my partner Arthur Abercrombie, and a number of other Taylor Porter people assisted, but hired us to defend the case. So we were actually involved in the trial that took place over 3 months in Franklinton, Louisiana. The case was tried in 2 phases. In the first phase, the jury was to determine liability and damages for 15 randomly selected plaintiffs, and then to determine whether or not Gaylord was liable for punitive damages for release of this chemical. The jury made the decision on the first phase, awarding very small amounts to the trial plaintiff, but they found Gaylord liable for punitive damages. So the second phase of the trial began to determine the amount of the punitive damages. We were within 2 days of wrapping up phase 2 of the trial when Gaylord Chemical Company released another big red cloud of this highly poisonous substance. The Gaylord Chemical and some of the lower level insurers settled the case before it went to the jury. We were both members of First United Methodist Church. I was a member of its board and in fact chairman of its board for one term. And Molly was always active as a Sunday school teacher and involved in civic activities. I was also involved I was president of the Louisiana Arts and Science Center and the Baton Rouge Sheltered Workshop, and served for 10 years as the general counsel for the Baton Rouge Chamber of Commerce. I've served on the board and other committees of the Louisiana Bar Foundation, which I consider to be an extremely important organization. I've also been president of the Baton Rouge Bar Association. I've been president of the Louisiana Association of Defense Counsel. I've been a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers and its Louisiana State Chair. And all of those organizations I have thoroughly enjoyed. I would appreciate being recognized as a good lawyer, as a good member of the community, but most importantly, as a good parent and grandparent.